Imagine sitting down to take this like profoundly important exam, right? You finish it, you hand in the paper, and the examiner tallies up your score.
Right.
And you got 96% of the answers completely fundamentally wrong.
Yeah.
But then the examiner just smiles, hands you a passing grade, and clears you for graduation.
Which is wild.
It is, because in literally almost any other field, a 4% success rate is, I mean, it's a catastrophic failure. But in the world of human biology, specifically when we look at male fertility, that 96% failure rate is considered perfectly normal. It's a passing grade.
Yeah, it really sounds like a statistical error when you first hear it, but that is the actual reality of human reproduction. We are dealing with a biological system that operates on just massive, almost incomprehensible redundancy.
Because the margin for error is so thin.
Exactly. The margin at the microscopic level is incredibly thin. And yet, despite how delicate this whole system is, society operates under this completely different, almost backward assumption.
Yeah, we operate under the assumption that fertility is almost exclusively a female domain. I mean, think about the historical precedent here. I always kind of call it the Henry VIII syndrome.
Oh, right, yeah.
You know, you have this absolute monarch, totally desperate for a male heir, just running through a series of wives, entirely convinced that the lack of a child was solely the fault of the women.
His ego just completely blinded him to his own disastrous health.
Exactly. It's this deeply ingrained egotistical tendency for men to blame women for reproductive issues. And like, obviously we don't live in the Tudor era anymore, but that reflex, it hasn't actually gone away. When a modern couple struggles to conceive, the default instinct, both culturally and medically really, is to just immediately look at the woman.
Which is a profound systemic blind spot, you know.
Yeah.
And the clinical data we're unpacking in today's deep dives, which is drawn from these really extensive discussions by medical professionals like Dr. John Campbell and Dr. Michael Cohen, it completely shatters that reflex.
Right. We're really pulling back the curtain on the sheer vulnerability of male biology today.
We are. But I think it's important for everyone listening to realize that this conversation goes far beyond just the mechanics of making babies. The metrics we use to evaluate male fertility, they are actually, they're the ultimate biomarkers for a man's overall vitality.
So it's tied to like immune resilience and longevity too.
Exactly. It's a window into overall health.
So we're looking at a roadmap to optimizing male health today, and we're going to do it by dissecting the biology from the top down without just, you know, defaulting to the most expensive high-tech medical interventions.
Right, because there's so much you can do before getting to that point.
Exactly. But before we can even get to the cells and the hormones, we have to navigate the biggest roadblock in this entire process, which is the psychological barrier.
Yeah, the ego.
Because, I mean, if you can't get a man to willingly walk into a clinic and actually provide a sample, none of this other biology we're going to talk about actually matters.
Right. And that hesitancy, it's rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of physiology, combined with like a really heavy dose of cultural conditioning. Men tend to operate on a very mechanical heuristic.
The whole plumbing analogy.
Yeah, exactly. If the physical plumbing appears to work, you know, if there is the physical output of ejaculation, the immediate assumption is that the internal manufacturing process must be flawless.
Right. It's a totally outcome-based logic. Like the machinery is turning, fluid is produced, therefore the product inside must be perfect.
It's a very visible, tactile assumption. The structural integrity is there, so the microscopic integrity is just assumed. But human biology isn't a simple hydraulic plumbing system.
No, it's this highly sensitive microscopic manufacturing plant.
Exactly. And confusing the two creates a massive imbalance in how couples approach fertility struggles. Because if we look at the actual clinical math here in the medical field, there's this recognized baseline called the rule of thirds.
Right, let's break that down for the listener.
So when a couple cannot conceive 1/3 of the time, the underlying issue originates entirely with the man. 1/3 of the time, it originates with the woman. And that final third of the time, it's a complex combination of factors from both partners.
So when you break down that math, it means in roughly 66% of all cases where couples struggle to conceive, there's a male factor involved. 2/3 of cases.
2/3, yes.
Yet the diagnostic pathway in modern medicine, I mean, it almost universally starts with the woman.
Yeah.
The psychological barrier, this male denial, it literally steals time.
It steals time and it causes incredible stress while the man is, you know, putting off a simple test, Women are frequently subjected to highly invasive preliminary tests.
Like the transvaginal ultrasounds, intense blood panels analyzing endocrine function, stuff like that.
Yeah, and sometimes even exploratory surgical procedures, like hysterosalpingograms, where they actually have to check the patency or openness of the fallopian tubes.
All while the man is basically sitting in the waiting room reading a magazine, completely convinced he is perfectly fine. I mean, it's infuriating when you lay it out like that.
It is.
But I do have to push back a little bit on where the blame lies here. Like, is this purely biological arrogance on the part of the man, or are we looking at a systemic failure of general practitioners?
That's a great question.
Are doctors just not inviting men into the diagnostic conversation early enough because of how medicine is compartmentalized?
Well, I think it is a self-reinforcing cycle of both, really. If you consider the structural architecture of modern healthcare, young women are typically introduced to gynecological care in their teens or early 20s.
Right, they have an established doctor.
Exactly, an established relationship with a specialist focused on their reproductive system.
Yeah.
Men just do not have an equivalent. There is no routine and andrologist visit for a 22-year-old male.
No, definitely not.
Therefore, when a fertility issue arises, the couple naturally defaults to the woman's established specialist. The male gets left out of the initial diagnostic loop, and his own ego, or just denial, gladly accepts that exclusion.
Which is wild. I mean, think about your own baseline health habits, right?
Huh.
If you are assuming your plumbing is fine just because the wheels haven't literally fallen off yet, you're walking into a massive health liability.
Absolutely.
We see this with men avoiding routine cardiovascular checkups, ignoring joint pain, or, refusing therapy. The default is to assume structural integrity until a catastrophic failure actually occurs.
But infertility, waiting for a catastrophic failure, burns the one resource you really cannot get back, which is time.
Right, the timeline is so critical.
It is. The timeline for healthy conception is actually often misunderstood. For a healthy 25-year-old couple, conception is generally expected within a few months of unprotected intercourse.
With doctors usually wait a year, right?
Yeah, the medical community standard is generally to wait for 12 months of active trying before initiating a full infertility workup. However, that window drastically compresses as age factors in.
Because of the biological clock.
Right. If the female partner is in her mid-30s, the biological clock regarding egg quality and ovarian reserve dictates a much faster timeline. They're usually investigating after just 6 months.
And when time is of the essence like that, waiting an additional 6 months to even test the man simply because of, systemic oversight or male ego, it's just a tragic waste of that critical window.
It really is.
Okay, let's move past the denial phase. Let's say the barrier is breached, the ego is put aside, and the man actually steps into the clinic to provide a sample.
Okay, the diagnostic phase.
Right. This is where the transition from psychological assumption to stark microscopic reality happens. Because the first line of investigation is a semen analysis.
Yes, and this completely shatters that plumbing versus factory illusion we talked about, because the laboratory isn't just checking for volume. They are looking at 3 incredibly specific, distinct metrics of cellular health.
Which are count, motility, and morphology.
Exactly. And each of these metrics represents an entirely different phase of the biological manufacturing and delivery process.
Okay, let's start with count.
So count is the baseline metric of volume. And we are not talking about thousands or even millions of cells here. A normal, healthy biological event requires hundreds of millions of sperm.
Hundreds of millions.
Yes, the sheer volume is necessary because the environment of the female reproductive tract is incredibly hostile by design. It's highly acidic to prevent infection, and literally millions of sperm will perish within the first few centimeters of the journey.
Right, so having a massive fleet doesn't really matter if none of the ships have engines. Which brings us to the second metric, motility.
Right, they have to swim.
Yeah, it isn't enough to just exist in the fluid. These microscopic cells have to move, and they have to swim with purpose and vigor. I mean, the journey through the cervix, into the uterus, and up the fallopian tubes. The doctors compared it to a human swimming across the English Channel against a tidal wave.
It's a massive, energetic undertaking.
Exactly. If the flagellum, the tail of the sperm, lacks the energetic capacity to propel the cell forward, or if the sperm are simply swimming in tight little circles, natural conception is a physical impossibility.
And the energy demands for that motility are staggering, which we will analyze really closely when we discuss cellular nutrition later. But the third metric is perhaps the most heavily scrutinized by specialists, and it is the one you mentioned at the very beginning.
Morphology.
Right, morphology. This refers to the physical architecture, the actual shape of the sperm cell. The World Health Organization parameters state that for a semen sample to pass as structurally normal, only 4% of the sperm need to possess ideal morphology.
Which is just, I still can't get over that.
Yeah.
It means a man can have 96% of his reproductive cells be physically mutated, misshapen, and he is still cleared as totally fertile.
Yeah.
And to understand why that number is so incredibly low, you have to understand the anatomy of a sperm cell. It is not just like a blob of DNA with a tail attached to it.
No, it's highly complex.
It is a highly specialized, stripped-down delivery vehicle. You have the head, which contains the tightly packed genetic payload, and covering that head is something called the acrosome cap.
And that acrosome cap is absolutely crucial. It is essentially this microscopic payload of digestive enzymes.
Right.
Because when the sperm finally reaches the egg, it encounters this thick, protective outer layer called the zona pellucida. The sperm must release the enzymes in that acrosome cap to chemically burn a hole through that outer shield, allowing the genetic material to enter.
So if a sperm has abnormal morphology, like say it's macrocephalic, meaning the head is way too large, or microcephalic, meaning it's too small, or it had two tails, or crucially, if it lacks that acrosome cap entirely.
It physically cannot do the job.
Right. It could be an Olympic swimmer, it could reach the egg first out of millions, but without the correct structural shape and that specific enzymatic cap, it will just bounce right off the egg surface.
Exactly. The 96% failure rate just highlights how chaotic and really error-prone the process of meiosis and sperm assembly actually is in the human body.
But before doctors can begin treating issues like, poor motility or a high percentage of morphological defects with lifestyle interventions, they have to rule out the absolute immutable roadblocks first, right?
Yes. And the most definitive of these is genetic.
Okay, let's talk about the genetics.
So in a subset of men presenting with azoospermia, which is the complete absence of sperm in the ejaculate, none at all, the underlying cause is often an anomaly on the Y chromosome.
The Y chromosome being the defining genetic structure for male biology.
Right. And within its architecture, on the long arm of the chromosome, there is a highly specific region known as the AZF, or azoospermia factor region.
The AZF region.
Yes. This region contains the fundamental baseline genetic blueprints required to even initiate the process of creating a sperm cell.
So the diagnostic test is looking for a deletion there.
Right. They look for something called an AZF microdeletion. This means a tiny microscopic fragment of the genetic code in this specific region is just entirely missing. And if that deletion is present, the situation is absolute. It fundamentally alters the clinical pathway.
So imagine trying to build this really complex suspension bridge, right? You have all the steel, you have all the concrete, all the workers are ready to go on the site. But the pages of the engineering blueprint that detail how to lay the foundation are just physically torn out of the book.
That's a perfect analogy.
It does not matter how much you optimize the workers' sleep or how perfectly you manage their stress or, what nutritional supplements you give them. The blueprint just doesn't exist. The factory cannot manufacture the product.
Exactly. If a microdeletion in the AZF region is confirmed, lifestyle modifications will yield absolutely zero results. It requires an immediate pivot to highly specialized surgical interventions to attempt to extract whatever precursor cells might exist directly from the testicular tissue.
And even that is incredibly difficult, right?
Very difficult, yes.
Yeah.
However, the clinical reality is that these genetic deletions account for a very small percentage of male infertility cases. For the vast majority of men who walk into a clinic with severe fertility issues, their genetic blueprint is completely intact.
The blueprint is flawless, but the factory still isn't producing anything. So when genetics are ruled out, the diagnostic focus has to shift from the blueprint to the management system.
Yeah, the endocrine system.
The doctors move to blood work to examine this communication loop between the brain and the reproductive organs. They're analyzing the HPG axis, right?
Yes, the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. This is the chemical feedback loop that entirely dictates reproduction.
How does that loop work?
Well, deep within the brain, the hypothalamus releases a master regulator called gonadotropin-releasing hormone, or GnRH.
Okay, GnRH.
This chemical travels just a very short distance to the anterior pituitary gland, essentially knocking on the door and telling the pituitary to release two critical messengers into the general bloodstream.
And those are luteinizing hormone, or LH, and follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH.
Exactly. Those two hormones travel all the way down to the testes, and they have distinct jobs when they get there. FSH targets the Sertoli cells.
The nurse cells.
Right, they are the structural nerve cells that actually assemble the sperm. LH, on the other hand, targets the Leydig cells, which are responsible for manufacturing testosterone. And you need massive amounts of local testosterone inside the testes to fuel the sperm assembly line.
And this is where the blood work reveals this fascinating but honestly deeply concerning clinical picture. Because frequently, a man will present with a severely low sperm count.
Right.
But when his blood is drawn, his testosterone levels might register as, like, low normal.
Yeah.
But his LH and FSH levels will be highly elevated.
Yes, and this is the ultimate picture of physiological burnout.
I always think of the brain like the pituitary gland as this frantic floor manager in a factory. The manager looks at the quota and sees that testosterone is low and sperm production has completely stalled. So what does the manager do? He yells louder.
Right, he sends more signals.
Exactly. He sends out more LH and more FSH. So the elevated levels in the blood literally mean the brain is just screaming at the testes to work faster.
But the testes, the employees on the factory floor in this analogy, are just completely exhausted. The chemical signal is binding to the receptors, but the Leydig cells simply lack the metabolic capacity to respond and produce the testosterone.
So the communication loop is perfectly intact. The signal is loud, but the cellular machinery is too degraded to actually answer the call.
Yes. And what makes this scenario so deceptive is that this internal endocrine collapse is completely invisible from the outside.
That's the scary part.
It really is. You can have a man walk into an endocrinologist's office who looks like a fitness magazine cover model. He has broad shoulders, he runs ultramarathons, his body fat is incredibly low, he eats a pristine diet. Externally, he is the picture of apex physical health.
But internally, microscopically, his HPG axis is just crashing. He is suffering from severe oligospermia, which is a critically low concentration of viable sperm. The external aesthetic of health just does not correlate with microscopic endocrine function.
No, it doesn't. You cannot gauge a man's reproductive viability by his athletic performance or the size of his biceps.
Right. So if the genetics are fine and the brain is sending the signal, but the testes are too burned out to respond, we have to figure out what is actually causing that localized exhaustion, what is draining the cellular battery so badly.
And the clinical data points directly to two massive, ubiquitous lifestyle factors that act as these silent saboteurs: sleep and stress.
Sleep and stress. Let's dig into the neuroendocrinology here, because modern lifestyle habits are basically in a state of open warfare with ancient biology. Let's start with sleep.
Okay, sleep. The common perception of sleep is that it's a passive state of rest, right? A time when the brain simply powers down. But physiologically, nothing could be further from the truth.
It's an incredibly active period.
Extremely active. It is a highly structured period of metabolic clearance and hormone synthesis. It is basically the primary manufacturing shift for the human body.
Right. And we discussed luteinizing hormone earlier, the messenger that tells the testes to make testosterone. That hormone is not released in a steady, continuous drip throughout the day, is it?
No, it is released in massive, highly concentrated pulses. And those pulses originate from the pituitary gland roughly every 90 minutes.
Every 90 minutes. And that interval is not a coincidence.
Not at all. It perfectly aligns with the standard architecture of a human sleep cycle, moving from light sleep down into deep, slow-wave sleep and up into REM. It is during these specific nocturnal cycles that the LH pulses are the strongest.
So these nighttime pulses travel down to the Leydig cells, triggering the surge of testosterone that sustains the sperm production process, which takes 24 hours a day to run.
Exactly. So if you interrupt those 90-minute sleep cycles, you literally interrupt the chemical signal. You cut the power line to the factory.
If the LH pulse doesn't fire, the Leydig cells just sit idle. Testosterone production plummets, and the entire assembly line of spermatogenesis grinds to a halt. And the data regarding sleep deprivation is just terrifying.
It really is, especially for anyone living in a modern, hyper-connected society. The clinical studies demonstrate how rapidly the system degrades.
What did the studies show?
Well, researchers took a cohort of healthy young men in their 20s and restricted their sleep to just 5 hours a night for a single week.
1 week.
1 week. We are not talking about chronic insomnia over a decade here. We are talking about 5 nights of staying up a bit too late and setting an early alarm to get to the office. In just 1 week, their baseline testosterone levels dropped by 10 to 15%.
Wow. They aged their endocrine system by over a decade in 5 days.
Yes. But the curve gets even steeper. If a man undergoes severe sleep deprivation, getting only a few hours of fragmented sleep for just 3 to 4 days, testosterone can be biologically suppressed by up to 50%.
50%, half of the driving force behind male reproductive biology, just wiped out by a bad long weekend or a stressful work deadline.
Yeah. The data shows that men who consistently average less than 6 hours of sleep a night face a 40 to 50% lower chance of conception per cycle compared to men who are protecting an 8-hour window.
I mean, sleep is a biological imperative, not a luxury. But in the modern world, sleep deprivation rarely exists in a vacuum, right? It was almost permanently coupled with the second major saboteur.
Chronic psychological stress.
Exactly. And to understand how stress dismantles fertility, we have to look at the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Radiate the fight or flight system.
For hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, stress was acute and it was physical. A predator was chasing you, or you were in a physical conflict for resources. In those moments, your body's sole priority is immediate survival.
Right. It doesn't care about digesting food, fighting off a mild cold, or producing cells for a baby that won't be born for 9 months.
It acts as an aggressive triage system. When the brain perceives a threat, the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys, they flood the system with cortisol.
Cortisol being the primary stress hormone.
Right. It liberates glucose into the bloodstream for immediate muscle energy, and it actively shuts down non-essential physiological functions to conserve metabolic power. I always think of it like a smartphone entering ultra battery saving mode when it hits 1%.
That's a great way to visualize it.
When the phone thinks it's going to die, it dims the screen, turns off the Wi-Fi, and aggressively shuts down all the background apps.
Yeah.
In the human body, the reproductive system is a massive, energy-intensive background app.
And the mechanism by which it shuts down that background app is incredibly precise. Elevated levels of cortisol in the bloodstream travel back up to the brain and physically bind to receptors in the hypothalamus.
Okay, so what happens when it binds there?
When cortisol binds there, it actively suppresses the release of GnRH.
The master regulator we talked about earlier.
Precisely. Without GnRH, the pituitary never gets the signal to release LH. Without LH, the testes never make testosterone. Chronic stress literally chemically gags the brain's ability to even initiate the reproductive cascade.
Man, this creates a devastating dual-pronged attack. On one side, a lack of deep sleep means you are physically missing the specific 90-minute biological windows where the brain attempts to send the LH signal.
Right.
And on the other side, chronic stress and high cortisol are actively suppressing the brain's underlying capacity to generate that signal in the first place. You're simultaneously gagging the manager and locking the factory doors.
Yes. And when you extrapolate this physiology to modern societal structures, the implications are just profound. Our biology does not differentiate between a physical predator and a demanding boss, right? Or a missed mortgage payment, or the endless barrage of digital notifications on our phones.
The adrenal response is identical.
Exactly. The clinical data explicitly calls out the severe toll this takes on shift workers, medical residents, and really anyone subjected to high-stakes, unpredictable schedules.
It forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable reality about how we live. I mean, we have constructed an economic system, one that demands 24/7 connectivity, prioritizes endless productivity, and normalizes high-stress environments, that is fundamentally biologically hostile to the mechanisms required to propagate our own species.
It is hostile, yes.
We are running the human machine in a permanent state of emergency battery-saving mode, and then we act surprised when the background apps fail to load.
Reversing this requires intentional, rigorous downregulation of the nervous system. The body must chemically perceive that it is safe before it will expend the resources necessary for optimal spermatogenesis.
But unfortunately, the mechanisms many men use to cope with this chronic modern stress lead us directly into the next layer of physiological disruption.
Toxins, temperature, and timing.
Right. We've mapped out the top-down signaling issues, how the brain gets shut down by stress and lack of sleep. Now, we must examine the local environment of the tests themselves. What habits are directly poisoning the factory floor? And the most socially acceptable, ubiquitous offender here is alcohol.
Yes, and there is a deeply embedded cultural irony surrounding alcohol consumption. In many societies, the ability to consume large quantities of alcohol is intertwined with traditional concepts of masculinity and virility.
The biochemical reality, however, is the exact opposite.
The exact opposite. Alcohol is a direct, aggressive chemical toxin to testicular tissue.
The biological mechanics of what alcohol does to a man's endocrine system are staggering. First, it acts as a direct depressant on the Leydig cells, literally impairing their physical ability to synthesize testosterone.
But it doesn't stop there. Alcohol upregulates a very specific, dangerous process in the male body called aromatization.
What is aromatization exactly?
Aromatization is the biochemical conversion of testosterone into estrogen. The body contains an enzyme called aromatase, which is found in high concentrations in the liver and in adipose tissue, or fat cells.
Okay.
Heavy alcohol consumption forces the liver into overdrive and stimulates the activity of this aromatase enzyme.
So the enzyme literally intercepts whatever circulating testosterone a man has left, chemically alters its carbon ring structure, and transforms it into estriol, which is a potent form of estrogen.
Yes. By chronically drinking, a man is chemically feminizing his own endocrine system. He is intentionally driving down his primary male hormone, artificially raising his female hormone, which consequently reduces lean muscle mass, increases fat deposition, and can literally cause testicular atrophy, the physical shrinking of the organs.
Wow. And then there's the oxidative stress, right?
Yes. Furthermore, the metabolic byproducts of alcohol breakdown, particularly acetaldehyde, induce massive oxidative stress. This oxidative stress directly attacks the cellular structure within the testes, leading to severe DNA damage within the sperm cells themselves.
This is where I want to play devil's advocate because this is the exact point of friction for so many men trying to navigate fertility advice.
Okay, let's hear it.
We just spent 20 minutes establishing that chronic stress and high cortisol are absolute fertility killers.
Right.
So if a man comes home from a high-pressure job and uses a single glass of wine or a beer to transition his nervous system to downregulate and bleed off that cortisol, aren't we trading one problem for another if we demand total sobriety?
I hear this all the time.
Because if taking away his coping mechanism spikes his stress back up to toxic levels, haven't we defeated the entire purpose of the intervention?
It is the most common of pushback clinicians receive. And if a man had normal fertility parameters, the argument that the psychological benefit of a single drink outweighs the minor toxic effect might actually hold water.
But we aren't talking about normal parameters.
Exactly. In a clinical scenario where a man is presenting with severe oligospermia or 1% morphology, the physiological landscape has fundamentally changed. The local acute toxicity of the alcohol on the already failing Leydig cells far exceeds any marginal systemic benefit from stress reduction.
You cannot put out a fire in the living room by intentionally flooding the basement. You have to address the structural integrity of the entire house.
The clinical protocol demands complete elimination of the chemical saboteur, requiring the patient to find alternative, non-toxic methods for downregulating the nervous system, whether that is exercise, meditation, or just altering their environment.
And this absolute sobriety is not a permanent lifetime mandate, right? It is bound by a very specific biological timeline, the 70 to 90-day rule.
Yes, that timeline is critical to understand. The male body is constantly manufacturing sperm, but it is not an instantaneous process. The sperm a man produces today began its maturation journey roughly 3 months ago.
Because spermatogenesis is such a complex process.
It is an incredibly complex process of cellular division, meiosis, and morphological assembly that occurs within the seminiferous tubules. Once the cell is built, it must travel to the epididymis, where it spends several weeks biochemically maturing and gaining the capacity for motility.
And that entire pipeline takes 70 to 90 days.
70 to 90 days, yes.
This means lifestyle interventions demand immense patience. If a man stops drinking, perfectly optimizes his sleep, and eliminates stress on a Friday, his semen analysis on Monday will look exactly the same.
Because the damaged cells are already in the pipeline.
Right. Any fundamental lifestyle or nutritional change requires a minimum of 3 months of strict adherence before the new, healthy batch of cells makes it through the factory and becomes available.
And this biological timeline underscores why fertility optimization must be an uncompromising joint effort. It is biologically counterproductive and, frankly, deeply unfair for the female partner to be undergoing immense lifestyle changes, taking prenatal vitamins, abstaining from alcohol, mapping her cycles,
while the male partner refuses to alter his habits because he operates under the illusion that his fertility is static and indestructible.
Exactly. Both partners must commit to the 90-day biological reset.
And part of that male reset involves understanding the fundamental thermodynamics of human anatomy. We have to talk about temperature.
Heat is a huge factor.
The male reproductive organs are located outside the main body cavity. This is not some evolutionary accident. It's an absolute requirement for cellular survival. They act as external air conditioners.
Yes. The core temperature of the human body is tightly regulated at approximately 37 degrees Celsius. However, The specific enzymes responsible for packing the DNA into the head of a sperm cell are highly heat sensitive.
So if they hit 37 degrees,
If they are exposed to 37 degrees, they begin to denature, and the entire manufacturing process stalls. Spermatogenesis requires a localized environment that is precisely 2 degrees cooler, roughly 35 degrees Celsius.
and the body goes to incredible lengths to maintain this.
Yeah.
There's a complex network of blood vessels called the pampiniform plexus that acts as this countercurrent heat exchange system, literally cooling the arterial blood before it reaches the testes.
It's a brilliant biological design, but modern habits easily overpower this delicate cooling system.
Like what?
Saunas, hot tubs, heated car seats, and even tight restrictive underwear physically press the testes flush against the 37-degree core of the body, defeating the external cooling mechanism.
The local temperature rises, the enzymes fail, and sperm production is effectively cooked to a halt. Maintaining the 2-degree differential is a non-negotiable physical requirement.
Absolutely non-negotiable.
So once you optimize the environment, the factory is cool, the toxins are removed, the stress is managed, you have to optimize the delivery. The clinical discussion touches on the physics of timing.
Right. Couples often use ovulation kits and are generally advised to try every second day during the fertile mid-cycle window.
And the rationale behind the 48-hour cadence is just biological math. It allows the male reproductive system approximately 48 hours to rebuild the volume and concentration of healthy sperm in the epididymis between events, ensuring the highest possible payload density.
But the immense pressure surrounding this timing is dictated by the viability window of the cells themselves.
Right, because we think of sperm as durable, but once they enter the female reproductive tract, their lifespan is startlingly brief.
Very brief. Generally, they remain viable for only 12 to 24 hours. There are anomalies where cervical mucus allows them to survive longer, but the core window is incredibly tight.
And the egg is only viable for roughly 24 hours after ovulation. You have a microscopic payload with a 24-hour battery life trying to hit a target that is only available for 24 hours.
You are trying to thread a microscopic needle in the dark.
Which brings us back full circle to why morphology and motility are paramount. Because if your timing is perfect, but the sperm lack the mitochondrial energy to swim, or they lack the acrosome cap to penetrate the egg once they arrive, the timing is irrelevant. The structural integrity of the cell must be flawless.
So we have removed the saboteurs, the sleep architecture is repaired, the cortisol is managed, alcohol is eliminated, and temperature is controlled. We have stopped the active damage.
Right. Now, how do we proactively rebuild and hyperfuel this cellular assembly line? This is where we move to the specific, targeted 90-day nutritional protocol.
Yes, and the clinical experts advocate for a highly specific, evidence-based stack of nutrients. But it is vital to preface this with a stark warning. Supplementation is a mechanism for optimization, not a rescue tool.
You cannot out-supplement the biological damage of chronic sleep deprivation or daily alcohol toxicity.
No, you cannot. The physiological foundation must be secure before raw materials can be effectively utilized.
You have to fix the roof before you buy new furniture for the living room. But once the foundation is set, the raw materials are the difference between adequate production and optimal production. Let's start with the most widely recognized mineral in male health, zinc.
Okay, zinc. The clinical recommendation is a strict ceiling of 25 to 30 milligrams per day.
Zinc is fundamentally required for testosterone synthesis and the structural formation of the sperm tail. But the clinical data includes a massive warning about over-the-counter supplementation.
It really does. This is a textbook example of how the unregulated supplement market can induce severe iatrogenic or treatment-caused harm. Well, the male wellness industry aggressively markets high-dose zinc supplements, often pushing 50 to 100 milligrams per capsule, operating on the flawed consumer logic that if a little is good, a massive dose must be better.
Right, the Frankenstein supplement stack mentality. Guys read an article, panic about their fertility, and start megadosing minerals. But they don't understand the underlying biochemistry. Zinc doesn't exist in a vacuum in the human body. It is intrinsically linked to copper on a biological seesaw.
Yes, the mechanism is called competitive absorption. In the lining of your gut, there is a protein called methylthionine, which binds to both zinc and copper to transport them into the bloodstream.
So what happens if you take a massive dose of zinc?
If you flood your gut with a massive 100 milligram dose of zinc, the zinc violently outcompetes the copper, binding to all available transport proteins. The copper becomes trapped in the intestinal cells and is eventually excreted.
By trying to boost your zinc, you actively induce a severe systemic copper deficiency. And copper is absolutely critical for the myelin sheath, the protective coating around your nerves.
Clinical literature is full of cases where men taking massive doses of over-the-counter zinc developed profound, irreversible myeloneuropathy, severe nerve damage, simply because they unbalanced the biological seesaw.
That is wild, and that is why the clinical limit is a highly targeted, moderate 25 to 30 milligrams.
Exactly. The next vital compound in the protocol targets the motility issue directly. L-carnitine, dosed at 2 to 3 grams daily.
To understand L-carnitine, you have to look at the energy requirements of a swimming sperm cell. We talked about the journey being equivalent to swimming the English Channel.
Yes, the flagellum, the tail, requires an immense continuous supply of ATP cellular energy to whip back and forth and propel the cell. That energy is generated by mitochondria located in the midpiece of the sperm.
So what does L-carnitine do?
L-carnitine acts as the primary chemical shuttle system. Its job is to transport long-chain fatty acids from outside the mitochondria directly into the mitochondrial matrix, where they can undergo beta-oxidation, the process of burning fat for fuel.
Oh, I see. By supplementing L-carnitine, you are essentially increasing the fuel lines to the engine.
Precisely, which is why clinical trials consistently demonstrate massive improvements in forward motility when this shuttle system is saturated.
You're giving the engine high-octane fuel. But high-energy engines produce dangerous exhaust, which brings us to coenzyme Q10, or CoQ10, recommended at 200 to 300 milligrams.
Yes, the clinical focus for CoQ10 is preventing DNA fragmentation, particularly for men in their late 30s and 40s, as natural synthesis of this compound drops off a cliff with age.
Right. When those mitochondria burn fuel to create energy, they naturally produce highly volatile byproducts called reactive oxygen species, or free radicals.
And if these free radicals are left unchecked, they will ricochet around the interior of the cell and physically shear the DNA strands packed inside the sperm head, leading to double-strand breaks.
So CoQ10 acts as a shield.
Exactly. CoQ10 sits directly inside the inner mitochondrial membrane. It acts as a primary electron acceptor, neutralizing these free radicals at the source of production before they can reach the genetic payload.
It is the internal blast shield for the DNA, and the body builds a second layer of defense using selenium, which is a required cofactor for an enzyme called glutathione peroxidase, another massive antioxidant defense system.
But the amazing thing about selenium is the delivery system. The doctors explicitly noted you do not need a pill for this.
No.
No, the required daily allowance for selenium can be achieved entirely by consuming just 1 or 2 Brazil nuts a day.
Wow, just 1 or 2 nuts. It is a powerful reminder that food matrices often provide the most bioavailable form of these specific micronutrients.
The same logic applies to the structural building blocks. The protocol calls for 1 to 2 grams of omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA.
Because the head of the sperm cell is encased in a phospholipid bilayer, a fat-based membrane, right?
Right. And the fluidity and flexibility of this membrane are entirely dependent on the presence of omega-3s. If the membrane is rigid, the sperm cannot successfully fuse with the egg.
You can get this through high-quality supplementation or by simply eating a few servings of sardines or wild-caught salmon every week.
Exactly. Now, once the cell is structurally sound and internally protected, it is released into the seminal fluid. This fluid must protect the sperm during the journey.
This requires an external shield, which brings us to the critical role of vitamin C, dosed at 500 milligrams, taken twice daily. The dosing schedule here is really fascinating because it highlights basic pharmacokinetics.
Yes, most people just take a giant 1,000 milligram pill in the morning and forget about it. But vitamin C is water soluble.
And because it is water soluble, the human body cannot store it in adipose tissue.
Right. When you take a massive single dose, it enters the bloodstream, the plasma becomes saturated, and the kidneys immediately filter out the excess via rapid renal clearance. You literally urinate the majority of it away within a few hours, leaving your system unprotected for the rest of the day.
But by splitting the dose to 500 milligrams in the morning and 500 milligrams in the evening, you maintain a steady, elevated concentration of ascorbic acid in the blood plasma around the clock.
And the reason you need that continuous presence is because human seminal fluid is naturally engineered to hold incredibly high concentrations of vitamin C. The fluid itself is designed to act as an external antioxidant armor, continuously neutralizing the acidic, hostile environment of the female tract to protect the swimming sperm.
This water-soluble defense is paired with vitamin E, dosed at 400 international units, Vitamin E, unlike vitamin C, is fat-soluble.
This allows it to physically embed itself directly into the lipid membrane of the sperm cell, preventing a destructive chain reaction called lipid peroxidation, where free radicals tear apart the cell wall from the outside in.
The doctors round out the protocol with 600 milligrams of N-acetylcysteine, or NAC, which provides the precursor amino acid the body uses to synthesize its own master antioxidant, glutathione.
And finally, vitamin D3, but only with a strict caveat based on blood work.
Right, they're very specific about that.
Supplementing vitamin D3 is only clinically justified if a patient's serum levels are suboptimal. The goal is to reach a serum concentration of 40 to 50 nanograms per deciliter. Once the receptor saturation point is reached, adding more provides zero additional reproductive benefit and can induce hypercalcemia.
So we have the complete picture here. The 90-day protocol. Deep, consistent sleep to trigger the LH pulses. Aggressive stress management to lower cortisol and ungag the hypothalamus. Zero alcohol to stop aromatization and liver toxicity. Strict temperature control. And a highly targeted, scientifically backed moderate dose nutritional stack to provide the raw materials for cellular assembly and antioxidant defense.
According to the clinical data, this specific protocol has successfully reversed severe cases of oligospermia and catastrophic morphology, returning men to baseline and resulting in natural conception.
Which forces us to confront the most glaring, uncomfortable question in modern reproductive medicine. If a 90-day commitment to physiological fundamentals, sleep, sobriety, stress reduction, and basic nutrition is so profoundly effective, incredibly safe, and relatively inexpensive, why is the default medical response so drastically different?
Why does the system bypass biology in favor of technology?
Yes. The doctors describe this phenomenon as the IVF reflex. It is this powerful, almost gravitational pull within specialized medicine to look at a slightly suboptimal semen analysis and immediately route the couple toward in vitro fertilization.
It is the ultimate manifestation of a medical culture that has become obsessed with high-tech, immediate interventions while entirely disregarding baseline physiological optimization.
And to be clear, IVF and advanced techniques like ICSI, where a single sperm is manually injected into an egg, they are miraculous technologies.
Oh, absolutely. For couples facing immutable barriers like the AZF microdeletion we discussed or severe female structural blockages, these technologies are the only path forward. But deploying them as a first-line reflex for lifestyle-induced male infertility is a massive overreach.
The clinical experts were intensely vocal about the collateral damage of this reflex. We aren't just talking about the financial devastation, though the out-of-pocket costs can easily eclipse tens of thousands of dollars. We are talking about the severe, disproportionate physical and emotional toll it extracts from the female partner.
This is the darkest reality of the IVF reflex for male factor infertility. The male provides a sample in a cup, and his physical involvement ends. The female partner, however, must undergo weeks of intense synthetic hormone injections designed to override her natural cycle and aggressively hyperstimulate her ovaries to produce multiple eggs simultaneously.
It's a massive systemic shock to our endocrine system. And it comes with severe risks. The clinical discussion highlighted a pathology called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, or OHSS.
Yes, Dr. Cohen recounted a terrifying case study of a patient who was told by a consultant that the IVF process was standard and no big deal. She subsequently developed severe OHSS.
What happens during OHSS?
The pathophysiology involves the hyperstimulated ovaries, releasing high levels of vascular endothelial growth factor. This causes the blood vessels to become highly permeable, literally leaking massive amounts of fluid out of the vascular system and into the abdominal cavity.
The patient Dr. Cohen described required a 10-day hospitalization to manage the fluid shifts, respiratory distress, and potential renal failure. 10 days in a hospital bed, fighting for her health, entirely because the medical system refused to spend 90 days asking her husband to sleep 8 hours a night and stop drinking alcohol.
As Dr. Cohen phrased it, modern medicine possesses a terrifying audacity to intervene. The system is so enamored with the technological fix that it completely bypasses the natural fundamental physiology of the human body.
It is the medicalization of a lifestyle failure. But we must also analyze the systemic pressures driving this behavior, right? Doctors operate in a hyper-litigious, outcome-driven, high-pressure environment. Consultations are incredibly brief.
That's very true.
And this is where I want to push back on the doctor's critique of their own industry. We have spent over an hour detailing how deep the male denial runs. We know how stubborn human behavior is. Is it entirely possible that specialists push the IVF reflex so aggressively because, frankly, they just do not trust their patients.
Ah, I see what you mean.
A doctor looks at a stressed-out, sleep-deprived guy who drinks every night and thinks, there is a 0% chance this guy is going to adhere to a strict 90-day biological reset. So rather than waste 12 months arguing with him and watching his wife's ovarian reserve decline, let's just extract the sperm, bypass the natural selection process entirely, and use a multi-million-dollar lab to force the issue. Is the technological reflex simply the only viable option in a society that refuses to be compliant?
It is a cynical diagnostic calculus, but it is undeniably present in clinical decision-making. However, the experts argue passionately that this cynicism is a self-fulfilling prophecy.
How so?
When a doctor simply hands a patient a diagnosis of low count and immediately pivots to an IVF brochure, they offer no actionable agency. But when a clinician takes the time to explain the granular mechanisms, when they explain exactly how the lack of sleep halts the LH pulse, or how alcohol aromatizes testosterone into estrogen, patients engage.
Because they understand the why.
Exactly. Understanding the why transforms a restrictive rule into a logical biological requirement. By assuming non-compliance, the medical system robs the couple of the opportunity to heal their fundamental biology.
And by bypassing the physiology, the system completely ignores the most astonishing, powerful variable in human reproduction, the mind-body connection. The clinical experts shared a case study that perfectly illustrates the raw, undeniable power of the nervous system over our cellular biology.
It's an incredible story. They detailed the journey of a couple in their 30s. They had undergone years of exhaustive, invasive testing. They had tried multiple interventions. The clinical verdict was absolute. They were facing unexplained, insurmountable infertility.
The psychological environment was defined by crushing existential stress. Believing all natural avenues were closed, they navigated the immense financial, legal, and emotional labyrinth of hiring a gestational surrogate.
They went through the entire process of IVF, creating an embryo, and having another woman carry their genetically related child. The surrogate had a healthy pregnancy and successfully delivered their baby.
And then the phenomenon of psychogenic infertility revealed itself in the most spectacular way.
Within months of bringing their baby home, the couple conceived entirely naturally. The biological lock simply opened. They subsequently went on to conceive and deliver a second child naturally with zero medical intervention.
The clinical takeaway is just earth-shattering. There was never a structural flaw in the reproductive anatomy. The plumbing was perfect. The genetic blueprint was flawless. The sole barrier to conception was the agonizing, all-consuming stress of trying to conceive.
It is the ultimate validation of the HPA axis override we discussed earlier. For years, the psychological threat of infertility kept their sympathetic nervous system, the fight-or-flight response, permanently engaged.
Cortisol flooded the system, continuously suppressing the hypothalamus and shutting down the reproductive cascade.
But the moment the surrogate delivered the child, the existential threat vanished. The psychological relief triggered a massive shift in autonomic tone, engaging the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest state.
Cortisol plummeted, the hypothalamus woke up, GnRH was released, and the reproductive system booted up flawlessly. It is absolute proof that no matter how advanced our laboratories become, we can never surgically separate the mind from the physical body.
Her thoughts, our anxieties, and our stress levels are physically translating into chemical signals that dictate cellular function.
So as we synthesize the massive amount of clinical data we have traversed today, the core revelation is that optimizing fertility is an uncompromising dual partner equation.
For men, this journey demands the total dismantling of the biological ego. It requires stepping out of the comfortable illusion of mechanical invulnerability and recognizing the profound, delicate sensitivity of the microscopic factory.
It is a commitment to the absolute fundamentals of human biology, a non-negotiable 90-day window, honoring the circadian rhythm with deep restorative sleep.
Aggressively managing the autonomic nervous system to halt the cortisol cascade.
Complete abstinence from chemical toxins like alcohol to protect the endocrine profile. Honoring the thermal limits of the anatomy. And utilizing targeted, specific nutrition to fuel mitochondrial energy and build antioxidant shields. As the experts summarized it with perfect clarity, the plain things are the main things.
The plain things dictate the profound outcomes.
And I want to make a vital, overarching connection here. Because even if you are not trying to conceive, even if you are single or you already have a full house or you have zero desire to ever have children, this deep dive is still a direct reflection of your current physical reality.
Yes. The precise metrics we have spent an hour dissecting, the structural integrity of your cells, the balance of your testosterone and cortisol, the efficiency of your sleep architecture, your body's ability to manage oxidative stress and clear toxins.
These are not just the metrics for making a baby. They are the exact identical metrics that dictate your general vitality, your immune system's resilience against disease, your cognitive sharpness, and your ultimate longevity.
The reproductive system is the ultimate biological canary in the coal mine. A physiological system that possesses the surplus energy and pristine cellular health required to generate new life is, by definition, a system that is thriving rather than merely surviving.
Which brings us back to where we started, looking at the historical arrogance of men blaming everyone else while ignoring their own biological collapse. The ego blinding the biology. We have just laid out the overwhelming mechanistic scientific evidence that standard, completely normalized modern habits, chronic stress, lack of sleep, casual daily alcohol consumption, are powerful enough to literally shut down the human body's innate ability to create new life.
They flip the biological switch from thriving down to bare survival.
So I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to ponder today. If these totally standard, everyday modern habits possess the sheer biochemical power to stop a brand new life from even beginning, what invisible, microscopic damage are these exact same habits quietly doing to the life you are currently living? Something to deeply consider the next time you decide to trade 2 hours of vital sleep for a little more time staring at a glowing screen. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.